It was a quiet afternoon at the park, one of those days when the sun was warm but not too bright, and a soft breeze moved through the trees. The single dad sat on a wooden bench, his hands wrapped around a cup of coffee he'd picked up on the way. His little boy ran across the grass, laughing as he chased a bright red ball. Watching his son play like that always filled him with a mix of pride and sadness. Pride, because his boy was growing strong and happy despite everything they had been through. Sadness, because life hadn't been easy, and he still carried the weight of that struggle on his shoulders. The park was calm, filled with the usual sounds of children laughing, birds singing, and distant chatter. He glanced at his watch, thinking about the work waiting for him at home. He'd been juggling 2 jobs lately, one at a construction site and another delivering groceries in the evenings. It wasn't glamorous, but it kept food on the table and a roof over their heads. He sighed, tired but grateful that at least this moment with his son felt peaceful. Then something caught his attention. Out of the corner of his eye, he saw 2 small figures wandering near the edge of the pond. At first, he didn't think much of it. Parents were always nearby. But when he looked closer, he noticed the 2 girls were alone. They were about the same age as his son, maybe 5 or 6, wearing matching dresses and holding each other's hands tightly. Their little faces were full of worry. He stood up quickly, scanning the park. No adults seemed to be looking for them. The girls stepped closer to the water, and one of them slipped slightly on the damp grass, letting out a small cry. Without hesitation, he jogged over, his heart pounding. Hey, it's okay, he said gently, kneeling down so he wouldn't scare them. Are you 2 all right? Where's your mom or dad? The girls looked at each other, tears welling up in their eyes. The smaller one whispered, We can't find Mommy. His heart softened immediately. He glanced around again, but there was still no sign of anyone looking for them. He crouched lower, smiling softly. It's all right. You're safe. My name's... Well, never mind that for now. Let's just sit here, okay? No one's going to hurt you. They nodded nervously. He led them away from the pond and onto the grass, sitting down with them so they'd feel less scared. He offered a bottle of water he had in his bag, and the older girl took it with trembling hands. Do you know your mommy's phone number? He asked kindly. They shook their heads. He tried again. Do you remember what kind of car she drives? This time, they nodded. A black one, the older girl whispered. He smiled, trying to comfort them. That's a good start. Don't worry, she'll come soon. You're safe with me. His son ran over, curious about the 2 new faces. He sat next to them and offered his toy ball, making the girls smile just a little. That simple gesture seemed to ease the tension. The single dad felt a wave of relief. Kids had a way of connecting without words, and his boy was helping calm them down. Minutes turned into almost half an hour, and still, no one came looking. He was starting to worry. He didn't want to scare the girls, but he also couldn't understand how they'd been alone for this long. He stood up, scanning the park again, and finally spotted a woman in the distance. She was running, frantic, her hair messy, and her face pale with fear. The twins jumped up shouting, Mommy, and ran toward her. The woman scooped them up, hugging them tightly, tears streaming down her face. Oh, my babies, she cried, her voice shaking. She kept repeating, I'm sorry, over and over, kissing their cheeks. The single dad stood a few steps back, relieved to see they were safe, but also feeling the tension of the moment. The woman finally turned to him, her eyes full of gratitude. Thank you, she said breathlessly. Thank you so much for keeping them safe. I thought I'd lost them. He nodded politely, not sure what to say. Her clothes were expensive, her jewelry subtle, but obviously expensive too. She looked like someone from a completely different world than his own. He smiled faintly and said, I'm just glad they're all right. She hugged her daughters again, still shaken. For a brief moment, her eyes met his, and something in her gaze lingered, but she was too overwhelmed to notice him clearly. She hurriedly thanked him again and guided her daughters back toward the sleek black car parked nearby. As he watched her leave, he felt an odd pull in his chest, like a memory he couldn't quite place. Something about her face seemed familiar, though he couldn't figure out why. He picked up his son, who had started to yawn, and they headed home. That night, he couldn't stop thinking about the encounter, the way she'd looked at him, the weight of her gaze, and the fact that her face felt like a piece of his past he couldn't quite remember. He brushed it off eventually, focusing on getting his son ready for bed. He didn't know it yet, but this was the moment that would change everything. The woman whose daughters he had just saved was about to bring back a storm from his past, a storm he thought he'd left behind forever. The next day felt like any other. The single dad woke up early, the faint smell of coffee filling their small apartment. His son was still asleep, curled up under his favorite blanket with a toy car clutched in his tiny hand. For a moment, he stood there quietly, watching him breathe. Moments like these reminded him why he worked so hard, why every long shift, every aching back, every night spent worrying about bills was worth it. After getting his son ready for school, he headed to his morning job at the construction site. It was tiring work, but he never complained. He'd gotten used to carrying his struggles quietly, smiling through exhaustion because he didn't want his boy to feel the weight he carried. But even as he tried to focus on work, his mind kept drifting back to yesterday. The girls' frightened faces, the way they clung to each other, and their mother. Her face kept flashing in his memory, her eyes wide with panic, and then soft with gratitude. There was something about her that felt oddly familiar. After his shift, he picked up his son and decided to stop by the park again. His boy ran off to the playground, laughing, while he sat on the same wooden bench, sipping from a cheap coffee cup. He didn't expect to see her again. But then, he noticed the same black car pull up at the curb. The woman stepped out, dressed sharply but casually this time, her long coat swaying with her steps. She spotted him right away and walked over. "Hey," she said softly, a warm smile on her face. "I was hoping I'd see you here." He stood up, slightly surprised. "Oh, hi. Are the girls okay?" "They're fine," she said with a relieved laugh. "Thanks to you. I've been thinking about yesterday nonstop. I can't imagine what could have happened if you hadn't stepped in." He gave a small shrug, uncomfortable with the attention. Any parent would have done the same. She studied him for a moment, her smile kind. "I don't think so. Most people would have looked the other way or called the police. You stayed with them. You calmed them down. That means a lot to me." Her tone was genuine, and he could feel her gratitude. He nodded politely, unsure what else to say. "Please," she added, "let me at least buy you a cup of coffee. I owe you that much." He hesitated, glancing at his son, who was happily playing with other kids. She seemed sincere, and there was something about her presence that drew him in, though he couldn't explain why. Finally, he nodded. "Sure. Coffee sounds good." They walked together to a small cafe near the park, her daughters tagging along and instantly warming up to his son. The kids giggled over chocolate muffins while the adults sat at a corner table. "So, do you live around here?" she asked, genuinely curious. "Yeah," he said, stirring his coffee slowly. "Just a few blocks away. Been in this neighborhood for a while." She nodded. "It's a good area. Busy, but safe usually," she added with a faint laugh, clearly still shaken from the day before. He smiled softly. "Accidents happen. Kids are curious. I know how it is." She glanced at him thoughtfully. "You're a single parent, right?" He nodded. "Yeah, just me and him. Been that way for a few years now." Her expression softened, and there was a flicker of respect in her eyes. "That's not easy. I know from experience." He raised his brows slightly. "You're a single mom too?" She gave a small smile, looking over at her girls. "Yeah. Been doing this on my own since they were toddlers. Balancing work and parenting, it's a challenge." There was a heaviness in her tone, something that told him her life wasn't as perfect as it looked from the outside. She carried herself with grace and confidence, but there was tiredness behind her eyes, a kind of quiet loneliness he recognized all too well. They talked more, sharing small details about their lives. He told her about his son, how smart he was, how he loved cars and building things. She talked about her daughters, their love for drawing and dancing, and how they had a bond that made them inseparable. But as she spoke about her career, his heart tightened. She didn't say much about her job, only that she ran a company. But her name suddenly clicked in his memory. He remembered seeing it years ago in an email, a name attached to a decision that had flipped his world upside down. Back then, he'd been working for a large company, trying to climb his way up. He'd been close to a promotion, close to finally having a steady life for his family. And then, it all came crashing down. A company-wide decision. Layoffs. He'd been let go overnight, with no warning, no chance to fight for his position. His marriage had crumbled shortly after. He'd been left with nothing but debts and heartbreak. And sitting across from him now, smiling kindly, was the woman who'd been in charge back then. She didn't seem to recognize him, and he didn't say anything. He wasn't ready, but his chest felt tight. "Thank you again," she said softly, breaking his thoughts. "You really are a good man. The world needs more people like you." He forced a smile and nodded. "I just did what I'd hoped someone would do for my kid." Her phone rang, pulling her attention away. She excused herself, stepping outside to take the call, leaving him with the kids. He watched her through the cafe window, her expression shifting into something serious as she spoke into the phone. She looked like someone carrying the weight of 100 responsibilities. He glanced at his son, laughing with her daughters, and felt a strange mix of emotions: admiration, bitterness, curiosity. He had saved her children, but she had once unknowingly destroyed his life. And now, fate had brought them back together. The cafe door chimed softly as she came back inside, slipping her phone into her bag. Her smile returned quickly, though he could see the trace of tension still lingering in her eyes. She sat back down, glancing at her daughters, who were now happily coloring on napkins with crayons the waitress had brought over. His son leaned in, showing them his toy car, and the girls giggled, their voices filling the warm little cafe. "Sorry about that," she said softly, brushing her hair behind her ear. "Work doesn't really stop for me, no matter where I am." He offered a polite nod. "I get it. You've got a lot on your plate." She chuckled dryly. "More than I'd like to admit. But that's life, isn't it?" He watched her for a moment, quietly observing the woman behind the polished exterior. She was poised, confident, clearly used to leading. But beneath that calm smile, there was exhaustion, maybe even loneliness. He recognized it. It was the same kind he saw in his own reflection at night, after his son was asleep. The kids were laughing together, and for a few minutes, silence settled between them. It wasn't uncomfortable, though. It was thoughtful. She looked up at him, resting her chin on her hand. "Can I ask you something?" "You don't have to answer if you don't want to." He gave a small nod. "Sure." "What's it like raising a child alone?" she asked, her voice soft, almost hesitant. "I mean, I know what it's like for me. But for a father, I guess I'm curious." He paused, surprised by the question. Most people didn't ask about his life. He wasn't used to opening up, but there was something about her tone that made him want to answer. "It's hard," he said honestly. "Not because I don't love being a dad. I do. It's just everything falls on you. Bills, meals, doctor's appointments, making sure he feels loved and safe even when you're falling apart inside. There are days I feel like I'm failing him, you know? But then he laughs or hugs me, and I guess I keep going because of that." Her expression softened. "I know exactly what you mean." She glanced at her daughters, who were now deep in a game with his son, their laughter ringing out like music. "I feel like I'm running a marathon every day. People see the business suits, the cars, the title. They don't see the nights I stay up crying because I'm terrified I'm not doing enough for them." Her voice cracked slightly, and she cleared her throat, quickly regaining composure. He nodded, his chest tightening with empathy. "You're doing your best. That's what matters." She looked at him with a faint smile, and for a moment, their eyes held a quiet understanding. Two single parents, strangers in the world, connected by the invisible thread of shared struggle. When they finished their coffee, she insisted on paying, and he reluctantly agreed. They walked out together, the kids running ahead, and she turned to him as they reached her car. "Would you maybe like to come over sometime? The kids clearly adore each other. And I think it would be nice for them to have more playdates." He hesitated. Her invitation was kind, but it felt strange, especially knowing the truth he hadn't yet told her. He forced a small smile. "Yeah, sure. They'd like that." She smiled warmly. "Great. Let's plan something soon." They exchanged numbers, and she drove off with her daughters, leaving him standing there with his son's small hand in his. That night, after putting his boy to bed, he sat at the kitchen table staring at his phone. Her name glowed on the screen where he'd saved her contact. It looked so ordinary, yet it carried the weight of years of pain. He thought back to those dark days, losing his job, feeling betrayed, watching everything fall apart. Her name had been on the letterhead. She'd been the one who signed off on his termination. He remembered how helpless he'd felt, sitting in that sterile HR office, being told his department was being restructured. He'd worked so hard for that company, believed in them, thought he had a future there. Losing that job had been the start of everything unraveling. The bills piling up, the arguments with his wife, the nights he'd gone to bed hungry so his child could eat. And now, here she was, smiling at him like they were friends. He leaned back in his chair, rubbing his face. She didn't remember him. Why would she? To her, he'd probably been just another name on a list, one of hundreds of employees affected by some corporate decision. Still, he couldn't deny there was something about her, something that made him want to know her beyond the anger and resentment he'd carried for so long. She wasn't the cold, heartless figure he'd imagined. She was a mother, just like him, trying to hold her world together. Days passed, and true to her word, she reached out. She invited him and his son over for dinner. At first, he wanted to say no. He told himself it would be easier to avoid her, to keep the past buried. But his son's excitement changed his mind. The boy had already asked about the girls from the park every day since they'd met. So, one evening, he found himself standing outside her house, or rather, her mansion. It was a modern masterpiece of glass and steel, glowing warmly against the night sky. He felt out of place, like he didn't belong there, wearing his best shirt that still felt cheap compared to everything around him. She opened the door herself, wearing a soft sweater and jeans instead of her usual business attire. She looked different, more relaxed, almost vulnerable. "Come in," she said warmly, stepping aside. He took a deep breath, holding his son's hand as they stepped into her world. The house was stunning, yet filled with warmth, family photos on the walls, toys scattered in the living room. It wasn't the cold palace he'd imagined. For a moment, he felt a pang of bitterness. She had everything: wealth, success, a beautiful home, while he'd spent years scraping by. But as he watched her kneel down to hug her daughters, her smile tired but genuine, that bitterness softened. Maybe things weren't as perfect for her as they seemed. Little did he know, this dinner would bring their worlds closer than ever, and force him to confront the truth he'd been holding back. Dinner was warm and inviting, the kind of meal that filled the room with a comforting smell of roasted vegetables and fresh bread. The twins giggled as they showed his son around their playroom, their tiny footsteps echoing down the hall. For a moment, the single dad stood awkwardly near the dining table, unsure if he should sit or help. He wasn't used to being in homes like this. Everything was elegant yet cozy, expensive but lived in. "Relax," she said with a small smile, noticing how tense he looked. She carried a bowl to the table and gestured for him to take a seat. "You're a guest. Just let me fuss over the food." He chuckled softly, scratching the back of his neck. "I'm not used to this. Usually, dinner at my place is cereal or grilled cheese." Her laugh was soft, genuine. "Trust me, I've had my fair share of nights like that too. I wanted tonight to feel special." He nodded, feeling a strange warmth in his chest. It had been a long time since anyone had gone out of their way for him. Once the kids were settled at their own little table, he and the woman sat across from each other, sharing a meal that felt surprisingly natural. She asked him questions about his work, his son, his life as a single father. And he answered honestly, though he kept some details vague. He couldn't stop himself from studying her as she spoke. She had a softness to her tonight, a vulnerability he hadn't expected. She wasn't the powerful CEO he'd imagined, the one whose name was attached to that dreaded termination letter. She was a mom first, one who looked tired but still made an effort to smile. After dinner, the kids disappeared into the playroom again, their laughter echoing through the house. She poured them both tea, and they sat on the couch in the warm glow of the fireplace. "You know," she began softly, "I don't usually do this." He raised an eyebrow. "Do what?" "Invite people over. Let them see this side of me. She took a slow sip of tea. Most people only know me as, well, as the woman who runs a company. The woman who makes tough decisions and doesn't have time for small talk. He stayed quiet, letting her continue. I've had to be strong for so long, she said, her voice trembling just slightly. After their father left, I thought I had to be both parents and still hold my company together. Some days I feel like I'm failing at everything. He looked at her carefully, the bitterness he'd carried for so long starting to feel heavier. Here she was, bearing her heart, while he held on to anger she didn't even know existed. You're not failing, he said quietly. You're keeping them safe, giving them a good life. That's more than a lot of kids get. Her eyes met his, glistening slightly in the firelight. She smiled, but there was pain behind it. Thank you. I don't hear that often. He nodded slowly, his chest tight. He wanted to hate her, to remember the coldness of that letter and the humiliation of packing his desk. But it was hard to see her that way now, not when she looked like someone who had been fighting her own battles all this time. Their conversation drifted to lighter topics after that. Their favorite childhood memories, funny stories about their kids, the exhaustion of parenting alone. They found themselves laughing more than expected, and the tension between them softened. But as the evening went on, he couldn't shake the weight of the truth he was hiding. Every time she looked at him with warmth and trust, he felt a pang of guilt. She didn't know he was the man she had once unknowingly ruined. Later that night, as he got ready to leave, she walked him to the door. The kids were sleepy, their little heads resting on shoulders as they said their goodbyes. Thank you for coming, she said softly, her voice warm but tired. It's been nice. Really nice. He smiled faintly, adjusting his son in his arms. Yeah, it has. For a moment, they stood there, an unspoken connection between them. It wasn't romantic, not yet. It was something deeper. Two single parents, two fighters, bound together by chance. When he got home that night, he lay in bed, staring at the ceiling, unable to sleep. Her laughter lingered in his mind. Her vulnerability, the way she'd looked at him, as if he was someone she trusted. And yet, she had been the person behind his lowest point. He remembered the day it happened so clearly, the shock of the HR meeting, the quiet humiliation of leaving the office with a cardboard box filled with his belongings. He'd been a promising employee, a man with big dreams. He'd been working hard for a promotion, believing his career would change his family's future. But the layoffs came, and his name was on the list. Her name was on the signature line. That single moment had started a downward spiral. Months of unemployment, mounting bills, the loss of his home, and eventually his marriage. He had clawed his way back for his son's sake, but the bitterness had never left him. Until now. Now he saw her differently. Maybe she hadn't known what her decision had done to him. Maybe she was just another person trying to survive in a cutthroat world. But he couldn't ignore the storm of emotions building inside him. He knew he couldn't keep this secret forever. The next time they met, he would tell her the truth. He had to. The days that followed felt heavy. He found himself distracted at work, his thoughts drifting to her face, her laughter, and the guilt he carried every time she texted to invite him and his son over. She had no idea who he really was to her, or what her decision years ago had cost him. But now, seeing her as a person, and not just the CEO whose name had been at the bottom of his termination letter, it wasn't as simple as anger anymore. There was empathy there too. She was a mother like him, fighting her own silent battles, doing her best in a life that demanded too much. He didn't want to keep lying, though. She deserved to know. And maybe, deep down, he needed to say it for himself, to let go of the bitterness he'd carried all these years. So when she invited them over again for dinner that weekend, he said yes, but this time his heart beat heavier as he drove to her house. The kids were thrilled to see each other again. Laughter and tiny footsteps filled the hallways as they ran off to play. She smiled warmly at him, dressed casually in a soft sweater, her hair tied back. "They're so happy together," she said. "It's nice, isn't it?" "Yeah," he said, his voice soft. She guided him to the kitchen, where she'd prepared a simple meal. The house smelled of baked bread and something savory simmering on the stove. It felt homey, like a place where warmth lived. Over dinner, their conversation flowed easily. She opened up more about her struggles, the pressure of leading a company, raising twins alone, and constantly feeling like she wasn't doing enough. He listened quietly, his heart aching because he could see she wasn't the heartless executive he'd imagined all those years ago. She was human. She was tired. She was trying her best. But he couldn't shake the weight of what he had to say. When the kids ran off to play again after eating, he finally found the courage to speak. "There's something I need to tell you," he said, his voice low. She looked at him curiously, her smile fading slightly at his serious tone. "What is it?" He took a deep breath. "A few years ago, I worked for a company. I was up for a promotion. I thought I had finally built a future for my family, until I got called into HR and told I was being laid off. It was sudden. No warning. And your name was on the letter." Her eyes widened. She froze for a moment, his words sinking in. "What?" "I worked for your company," he continued quietly. "You were the CEO. That decision, it wrecked my life. I lost everything. My job, my home, my marriage. I had to start over from nothing." She blinked, stunned, and leaned back in her chair. For a moment, she didn't speak. She was processing, her face pale. I didn't," her voice cracked. "I didn't know." He shook his head softly. "I figured you didn't. You were running a massive company. I was just another name on a spreadsheet. But I needed you to know. That decision, it changed everything for me." Her eyes filled with tears. She pressed a hand over her mouth, shaking her head. "I'm so sorry. I didn't mean. God, I didn't know it would hurt someone like that. I thought I was just making a business choice. She broke off, her voice trembling. He sighed, his heart heavy, but calm. "I was angry for a long time. Bitter. I blamed you for everything. But saving your daughters that day at the park, seeing you like this, I realized you're just a person. A mom trying her best. And maybe I needed to let it go." Tears streamed down her face now. She reached for his hand. "I'm so sorry," she whispered. "I wish I could take it back. I'd give anything to undo it." He squeezed her hand gently. "You don't have to. I wouldn't be who I am now without that struggle. My son wouldn't have the dad he has today if I hadn't gone through it. I'm not saying it was easy, but maybe it happened for a reason." She wiped her eyes, her voice shaking. "At least let me try to make it right. Please. Let me help you. You deserve better than what life gave you." He gave her a faint smile. "You've already helped. You gave me closure." There was a long pause. She looked at him with something new in her eyes, not just guilt, but admiration, respect, maybe even hope. The kids came running back into the room, their laughter breaking the heavy silence. They climbed into his lap, giggling, and one of the twins hugged his arm tightly. "You are the best," she said, her innocent words filling the room with warmth. The CEO mom watched the scene, tears still in her eyes, and something softened in her expression. She saw him not as a name on paper, not as an employee from the past, but as a man who had chosen kindness over anger, who had saved her children and shown her grace she didn't feel she deserved. As the evening went on, they laughed again, played with the kids, and shared stories. The tension melted into something new, something healing. Later, as he stood by the door, ready to leave, she stopped him. "You know," she said softly, "you may think I ruined your life once, but maybe you just saved mine." He looked at her, surprised. She smiled gently, tears glistening in her eyes. "You reminded me of what really matters. Not power, not titles, just being human, being a good parent. Thank you for forgiving me." He felt a weight lift off his chest, like a chapter of his life had finally closed. That night, as he tucked his son into bed, he felt something he hadn't felt in years, peace. And maybe, just maybe, a spark of hope for a future where pain could turn into something beautiful. Sometimes, life had a way of connecting broken pieces in ways you could never expect.